Hi, my name is Carice. Welcome to Scofield Farm. Today, I want to talk to you about my favorite fruit to grow and why I love to grow this fruit in containers. And that fruit is citrus. I'm going to give you the top 5 reasons why I love to grow citrus in containers. I've done both. I've experienced in the ground, I've experienced containers. I also, at the end, I'm going to give you a few tips to help you be successful if you choose to try to grow citrus in containers as well. I have made my share of mistakes in growing citrus over the last 20 years, and I would like to share my experience with you, so hopefully it helps save you from making some of the same mistakes that I did. We live in Northern California at Zone 9B, and doesn't that sound like the perfect place to be successful in growing citrus? The answer is yes and no. And I'm going to explain to you what I found as challenges for growing citrus in the ground, even in our climate that doesn't often get below 30 degrees. I'm going to also share with you why growing fruit trees, even citrus trees, is not as easy, even in our climate, as it might seem. At our very first house we owned, we had a little house in the small city we live by, and it was a normal sized lot. It was shaded by 2 enormous oak trees, so there wasn't a whole lot of the property that got a lot of direct sunlight. It had really good soil compared to where we are now. I didn't realize how good we had it until we came to here, where we have a lot of clay and rock. But we planted a Meyer lemon tree right outside my bedroom window. We planted Meyer lemon, we planted lavender. That tree lasted the first couple years, but then I lost it one cold winter where I guess it got too much of a cold snap for a young citrus. And I didn't know at that point the different ways that you can help your citrus, young citrus, live through the winter. And even places like here, if they're not established, they have a little bit harder time. I do have a whole video about that. I will link in the description below. I killed 2 different lemon trees at that house. I wouldn't call that very successful at growing citrus. The next place we lived was a rental that had a mature orange tree. However, that was also a very shaded backyard with large, beautiful oaks. They completely shaded that orange tree, and that tree never produced fruit. We lived there 3.5 years. We didn't get one orange off that tree at all. Now, as a child, my childhood home, where my mom still lives, had a giant grapefruit tree outside the bedrooms. It thrived. We didn't do anything special to it. We didn't fertilize it that I know of. We didn't compost it. It did get water. It would be loaded with grapefruits every year. I was kind of left scratching my head as to why that tree did so well at my childhood home in the same city, and my experiences trying to do young citrus as an adult did not turn out the same. Fast forward, we bought this lovely property. The very first thing we did 5.5 years ago, right by my birthday. The house closed a couple days before my 40th birthday, and my husband bought me this lovely Meyer lemon tree right behind me. The very first thing we did was rip out some really tall hedge bushes that was here, and we planted this Meyer lemon tree and 2 small French lavenders. Well, I'll have to show you how huge those lavenders are now. Here is the large and in charge lavender that I desperately need to prune back. And here is my 40th birthday present lemon tree. You do see there are lemons on the tree. My lemon tree is still pretty small because we did not amend the soil. Major mistake. We went back later, we dug kind of a circumference around the bottom and we amended it then, but in some ways, not quite too little too late. It's kind of limping along. It does have lemons on it if you look, and that's the good news, but it's definitely small for being in the ground for 5.5 years. Has it died yet? No, because I finally learned how to keep citrus alive over the winter. I still would tell you I prefer citrus in containers. I am going to show you why. I'm going to walk you out to my little citrus grove as I tell you how I even started thinking I wanted to try citrus in containers or pots. I started this little grove of mandarins. I started with 2 mandarins, a loquat, and a lime tree. I successfully killed 2 lime trees over here. I tried the Christmas light method in the winter. It didn't go so well. I did get some bags to cover that did a lot better, but I finally was like, maybe I'm going to have an insurance policy. That is literally why I bought these giant pots from Costco to grow citrus. I thought I want an insurance policy if all of these die. And now I have, well, I did have 8. I killed 2, not from the cold. It was from the heat. And somehow the water, the irrigation got messed up by a chicken. I didn't know. Yeah. I decided I'm going to make sure while these get established, I'm going to be able to have something close to my house that I check on a little better, that is not having to deal with the clay soil, and that I can maybe hole under the eaves if it gets cold. That's really was my thinking. Insurance. That's what I did, and I've had incredible results. And the first reason why is because when you have a fruit tree or any type of plant in a container, you get to control the soil a lot more than whatever you happen to have at your property. You might have really sandy soil where you live. You might have clay soil. You might have the perfect, wonderful, loamy, mulchy, humus, how do you say it? You just don't know what it's going to be. And it can take a lot of amending, which can be done. And we did amend for these trees. But I'm going to show you those potted citrus, and even seeing the difference in the fruit, you're going to see how much it has mattered that they're not in a mostly alkaline clay soil right now. This one I've only had a year and a half. It's young. It doesn't have a lot of fruit because, as I said, water got kind of messed up, but it lived. This is my oldest mandarin tree I have. I have had this one in the ground, I want to say 4 years. It's very nice and bush-like, which was purposeful. I want them to be bush-like, but as I said, with the water problems, I don't know if I have any mandarin on it right now. That's okay, I'm not worried about it because I have mandarin in my pots up front. Here is one that died from the water issue. Oh, and look, also gopher problems. Well, that's not lovely either. If you're going to plant citrus in a pot, you want to pick a potting soil that's very high quality. I'd suggest something organic. They even make different potting soils specifically for the needs of citrus. I'm trying to remember what I did. I'm pretty sure I took our homemade compost. I mixed it with peat moss and vermiculite. I used to do square foot gardening when I very first started gardening at that house that had barely any sun. I had little 4x4 raised beds, only 2. I'd mix up what they call Mel's Mix, and I've really liked it. So I'm pretty sure that's what I did with mine. I don't think I bought a citrus mix, but they're out there and they are helpful if that would help you out. The second reason I already made mention to when I said why I thought about doing citrus in pots, I thought good insurance policy. I can pull it up under the eaves if things get really cold, and I'm not gonna have to worry if Christmas lights are keeping it warm enough, if the frost bag blows off if it's really windy. Most of our rain is in the winter, and it's a cold rain, it's often windy. Even those bags with cinches on the bottom can possibly blow off. And so my second reason for growing citrus in pots and containers is the portability. You can actually move them under the eaves. You can move them indoors if you have to, which I feel like that extends which zones can actually be successful growing citrus, because they aren't locked into being able to be grown outdoors year round. I have a friend who lives here. She lives more in town. My property happens to be a little bit cooler lows in the winter. We just dip down a degree or 2 that actually matters in the winter time, lower than the places around us. But she likes to pull them in almost like a winter Christmas type of decoration, and she'll hang little lights on them inside. And it's so pretty because her little Meyer lemon tree in a pot will be packed with fruit inside her house, and it is just quite lovely. So even that alone, for the prettiness of bringing it indoors, but also for protecting it from the cold, portability, you really can't beat with growing it in a container. And that would be my number 2 reason. Maybe my number 1, but I mentioned the soil first. My number 3 reason is I think growing citrus in pots is really, really pretty decoratively outside the house. And as I mentioned, like my friend brings hers inside as well. Let me show you how pretty this is. So here is my lime tree. Remember how I said I am not successful with limes in the ground? Beautiful limes, packed with limes. And it's out front in front of my house. So we have these beautiful big containers from Costco. They kind of line this corner of my yard, and they're beautiful, and they are packed with fruit. Oh my goodness, there's even more blossoms. How pretty. And look, there's a little baby one right there. And more baby lemons. This is a Meyer lemon tree. Can you see how much more fruit there is on my potted Meyer lemon than on my in-ground Meyer lemon? Now, I think eventually if I can keep that in-ground Meyer lemon alive, it will probably outperform. But right now, as I wait, I have a lot of lemons I'm going to get to harvest from this one potted tree. I mean, it's doing really, really well. It goes all the way over that yard right there. And this grapefruit, it is packed with beautiful fruit in a lovely container. I get comments all the time about how pretty our citrus trees are out front. I first had them in the back patio by our pool, and I actually liked them out front better. I felt like it added beauty to our home. I want to show you the front of my house where I usually pull them under. I will pull the trees right under here next to the house, under the eaves, and it actually gets the warmth from the house. It gets the protection from the eaves, and I don't have to worry about even putting frost bags on at all. They are completely safe in our climate. It might be different in yours, but it's enough protection in ours. It's actually the exact amount of protection that ours need to actually get more mature. Now, as I mentioned with that grapefruit, I have thought that I might actually put that grapefruit somewhere in the ground at some point. It is getting really big. It's very vigorous. You know, that's something I'm thinking about since we do live in a zone, in an area that has a lot of mature citrus doing well, but keeping it in a pot for now, getting a lot of fruit right now while it matures. You can see the amount of fruit difference was between that and my in-ground Meyer lemon. I get to enjoy the fruit longer, and then I still can make a choice to plant a more mature tree versus the little trees that usually come when you buy a young citrus. Number 4. It kind of goes with number 2, the portability. Growing in a container or in a pot is great for someone with little space to grow, or who lives in a rental or a more temporary type of situation where you might not want to leave behind your cherished citrus tree. Grow it in a pot. You can have it on a balcony. You can have it on the steps in front of the house. You can take it with you when you move. We lived temporarily in my mom's house for about 15 months after a big fire, and I had a few pots that I did a little bit of container gardening in her courtyard that I knew whenever we found a house, I could actually take those with us. And that's one way you can think about growing in containers or pots. Even a fruit tree, a citrus tree, it can come with you if you live in a really small space, a temporary space, an apartment, someplace that you might not even have room in the ground to plant an actual tree. It keeps them more compact. It keeps them more dwarf. Now, I'm going to tell you some things that you might want to consider, some challenges and tips with growing in pots, but that's a really good thing. When you don't have a lot of room to keep it more dwarf, to keep it smaller, it can be an advantage. I've told you my top 4 reasons. My 5th reason I've been talking about for a little bit, and if you haven't noticed, it's the fruit. The 5th reason to grow in containers is the fruit. I love fruit year-round. Citrus is a grapefruit that actually is ripe and ready to eat in the winter, and there's not a lot of kind of fruit trees that you can get fresh in the winter. So growing citrus in pots for me has made it more fruitful at a younger time, and I get to enjoy a lot of delicious, really rich in vitamin C fruit in the cold seasons where we actually need the most vitamin C, and fruit is especially special and a delicacy. Now, I've got to tell you the coolest story. This summer, my husband and I went to Napa Valley to celebrate our anniversary, kind of belated, and we went to an amazing farm-to-table restaurant called Farmstead, and it had all of these beautiful citrus trees in pots as you walked to the entrance of the restaurant. Now, the rest of the restaurant had, a huge garden. It had the type of trees that look like fencing. I'm forgetting the name. I will put that on the screen. But I felt so affirmed that this really high-end farm-to-table restaurant grew their citrus in pots just like we do up here in Northern California. I have a video of that time and the beautiful gardens and stuff. I'll link to that in the description below as well. Now, what are some cons about growing citrus in pots? One con is something that I said was a benefit, and that's size. It will naturally dwarf the size of the tree. You're not gonna have a tree that is 14 feet tall in a pot. You're also gonna have to keep track of if the pot gets too small. You don't want your roots crowded and to become root bound. So you can always move it up to a larger container, maybe a bigger barrel than even this. There's a lot of options. That's something you do want to keep in mind, is it will limit the size of your plant. As I said, that can be a pro, but maybe for you, that can also be considered a con. I don't know if you're noticing that tube behind me between the pots, but that leads into my next thing I wanted to kind of warn you about that might be a con, is when it is in a pot, when any fruit tree or really any plant is in a pot, it needs more frequent watering than in the ground. It also needs more frequent feeding with compost or with fertilizer, because it will deplete the nutrients from the soil. The pot can heat up, it can dry out much quicker than if the roots were in the ground, where they can spread out and search for water and search for nutrients. So we always have to keep that in mind. It is going to cause our watering and our fertilizing or feeding the soil to have to be more intentional, more focused. When we went to Guatemala this summer to see my husband's parents, my husband grew up in Guatemala, we did not have any of these on drip. And so my husband worked really hard. We were going to be out of the country for 2 weeks. He worked very hard to get this all on drip so I wouldn't have any problems with my citrus while we're gone. That was very good because it was record-breaking heat this June. And you saw over in my mandarin grove, we lost 2 because the water got messed up while we were gone and we didn't know. I want to kind of lead into kind of another benefit of having citrus in pots, is often that means you can grow it closer to your house, closer to where you are, and you will notice problems faster. That's a bonus for you, not in my top 5, but if I had seen these wilting when I drove up my car to park and go in the house, I would have been able to do something about it more than intentionally going over to my mandarin grove and wondering why a tree was dried up, checking the water and seeing that the tube was just shooting water, who knows, way off into nowhere land. I already mentioned that you may need to move up a container size if the roots start to get crowded, and that's just something that you have to check. I'll have to check. I haven't had to yet. It's possible, it's doable. I can get a bigger container if I need to. And in this meantime, I get to enjoy all this wonderful fruit, and I'm not complaining. Right outside my front door. A few bonus tips. Make sure to use really good potting soil. Use the top quality that you can afford. As I said, we used homemade compost. There's also great citrus mixes. Use something that you feel good about feeding your soil that will feed your plant for a really good, healthy start. Another tip is you want to mulch, at least in climates like mine. I have wood chips on the top of my citrus soil line because 1, pots dry out faster, but 2, we get so hot here that I already mulch with wood chips in my garden, in my flower beds, my pollinator garden, under fruit trees, as you saw over in our mandarin grove. I feel like mulching is always good whether you're in a container or in the ground or like a raised bed garden. Mulching, good. 2 thumbs up from me, and I have a video about mulching as well. I'll link that too. The last tip I want to mention is you want to make sure if you get containers or pots that they have drainage holes, or you get a drill and you drill some really good drainage holes, because every plant needs to drain. You don't want it to become some soupy, soily mess in there that gets really hot and basically boils your roots to death. We don't want root rot. We don't want any of that stuff. Make sure, double check that you have drainage holes. These pots from Costco did not have drainage holes, so all we did is we got a big enough drill bit, we turned them over, popped some holes in there before we transplanted the trees. You guys, it's that simple. My 5 reasons: portability, control of your soil, It can be used as decoration. You can grow in small spaces, and for someone who maybe doesn't have a permanent place, and in my experience, earlier fruit, which who can beat fresh fruit in the winter. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next video. If you have thought about growing citrus, and right now when I'm recording this is the fall, you might wonder, how do I keep my citrus alive in the winter? I'll meet you over there where I give you my top tips of how I have failed and how I've succeeded at keeping my citrus alive all winter long. I'll see you over there.